So for this one, how about I cover the change?
And I'll cover the continuity.
Or actually, I'll cover something different.
I'm still doing continuity.
Or instead of different, something else.
And I'll do continuity.
Or instead of...
Imagine you have a time machine and you go back 100 years to the place you are right now. What will you recognise? Are there schools, roads? How do people buy things now? What's different? Do people dress the same? Do they interact the same way? You'll likely be able to describe a lot of things that are different, but maybe not so many that are the same. For this exact reason, understanding continuity and change over time can be a real challenge for students. They're often good at spotting the changes, but continuity is more of a challenge. So, continuity and change over time is, unless you're paying me by the syllable, I'm just going to say CCOT. Are we good? Good. As historical thinking skills go, CCOT is like comparison with a shot of espresso. It's a way to compare the past and the present to evaluate both what has changed and what has remained mostly the same. It helps us think about the degree of change. Was it global, interregional, regional, or local? Did the change happen quickly or gradually? Did the change or the continuity move things in a positive or negative direction, and for whom? Most students think of history as a linear series of changes, and that's natural. But thinking about CCOT gives them the opportunity to consider how many changes may actually be continuities of trends that take place over long periods of time. It allows them to hone other skills, such as comparison, causation, and claim testing.
Kim is not kidding. CCOT is amazing. Now, of course, we don't want all the other historical thinking practices to get jealous, since they're all just as important for different reasons. But continuity and change over time definitely get students thinking about the historical events in new and even more usable ways. So, now we all know what CCOT is. How do you teach it? Like any important tool, knowing what it does is not the same as using it. Our approach was created by two of our World History Project teachers who have taught CCOT for many years. They came up with an engaging tool that makes this historical thinking practice approachable for students. It's active, it's fun, and best of all, it can spark some of the liveliest debates you may ever see about CCOT. Yeah, we know how that sounds, but if you're watching this, the time has come to let your history nerd flag fly. Here's how it works. The first part of this activity should be done in small groups. The initial step of the tool is quick and orients students to the task at hand. They simply note the periodization of the topic they're exploring and make some predictions about the kinds of continuities and changes they think they'll see based on prior knowledge. Next, they will jot down continuities and changes they discover in an article or video and add that to the tool. For CCOT activities, we often use the overview articles, but you could really use anything. After they write down all the continuities and changes they can think of, they'll categorize them according to the course frames. That means they label them as communities, networks, or production and distribution. Some might get more than one label because, hey, it's history, not algebra. There are different ways to get it right. Next part of the tool. Students decide which are the most significant changes and continuities and whether they are positive and negative. If you're imagining how this unfolds, you might be hearing the classroom volume level rising quickly. Go with it. Deciding what's most important and whether it was good or bad is pretty subjective. Students will find themselves having to defend their arguments. That's engagement, and it makes our little teacher hearts sing, but it makes their little teenage mouths belt some high notes as well. Once each group is in harmony, having settled on the most important continuities and changes, they'll write them on...
They write them on sticky notes! Sorry to interrupt, but I love anything with coloured sticky notes. That's when you know it'll be a fun activity. The notes correspond to each frame. So for example, yellow might be communities, pink might be networks, and blue might be production and distribution. Okay, so we're getting to the best part. At this point, you'll need to create a large grid on your board or a piece of chart paper with continuities and change on the x-axis and positive and negative on the y-axis. Then, each group will place their sticky notes where they think it goes. They'll need to be ready to defend their position because if someone from another group wants to move a sticky note, they can. That's why we're using sticky notes and not writing directly on the board. But anyone who moves a note better darn well be able to explain why. So, for example, maybe I think that it's a huge and positive change that networks went from being regional to global during Era 5, the first global age, approximately 1200 to 1750 CE. The fact that goods, ideas and people could spread across the world was a huge change, and it allowed for many improvements as communities were able to build on innovations from other communities on the other side of the world. That's a good thing.
Nope, I think this was actually a continuity, because we've seen these networks growing continually over the last couple of eras. This is just an extension of that growth. And sure, there were some positive consequences of this global network, but things like slavery and the Black Death flourished on these networks.
You always disagree with me.
I do not.
You just did. By the way, that's a really nice shirt you're wearing.
It is not. Okay, I see what you did there.
The point is, this activity triggers a lot of discussion and debate. It forces students to think about scale and periodization. What might seem like a really big change in a short period of time looks more like continuity when you zoom out and see trends across longer periods. Giving your students the opportunity to challenge each other by changing the placement of their sticky notes forces both sides to make claims and then show evidence to support their claims. You know, the kind of thing we try to emphasise every single day in a history classroom, but with sticky notes in different colours. I promised I wouldn't cry.
While Kim collects herself, let's go through the final step of these activities. When students are asked to, you guessed it, write. We'll start them small with a few sentences while it's early in the course. Then later in the progression, they write a paragraph or two. Before the end of the year, they'll be writing whole CCOT essays. As with all the progression activities, students receive more scaffolding early in the course, but we'll gradually remove that in later eras and units. Of course, you're the one who decides how much scaffolding your students need or don't need. Similarly, whether this writing is done in a group or individually is up to you. We mix it up throughout the progression, but it is ultimately your call.
So, there you have it, an approach to CCOT that will get your students wondering, discussing, arguing, and most importantly, thinking critically. Now, we mentioned before that students often find it easier to recognise the changes rather than the continuities. So don't be surprised if you have to help students a bit at first. Remember that when you zoom out, you're likely to see those continuities more as the changes flatten out. Fortunately, we've got the real experts, teachers like you, to help guide you through some of these challenges. Check out our blogs to find CCOT advice and, of course, the community is always a tremendous source of answers for any questions on CCOT. Oh, that's so thoughtful.
I knew you'd like it.
Wait, are you making fun of me?
Just enjoy the moment.